Hello and welcome to Birth Time, the podcast. Following the success of our world-renowned and international award-winning film, Birth Time, the documentary, we are coming back together to explore a wide variety of topics around pregnancy, birth and postpartum. As a way of exploring topics in great depth, we will be covering one topic over several episodes, bringing you up-to-date evidence-based information from academics, practitioners and birth workers, as well as stories and lived experiences from birthing women and people and their families. We will also have interludes with people we interviewed in Birth Time the documentary, finding out where life has taken them since the creation of the film. Join your hosts, home birth midwife Jo Hunter and doula and birth photographer Jerusha Sutton as we delve deep into the world of growing and birthing babies. Hello, welcome back to Birth Time, the podcast. This is episode 7, I think, of our podcast. We've just finished our birth trauma series, which was the previous 5 episodes where we delved deep into birth trauma from the viewpoints of all different people. And this episode is a little interim episode, which is what we're planning on doing in between our series, where we come together with a guest that was in our film and we have a chat with them about where life has taken them since the release of the film. Also in these episodes, all being well, the delightful, amazing Zoe Naylor is going to be joining us. And we're bringing the band back together, aren't we, Zoe?
We are, except that the band members were meant to all be here today with Jo too, but she's just had to go to a birth. So she's off doing the do.
We were having a chat 5 minutes ago and she went, oh no, I gotta go. So here we are. But our guest today is the incredible Hannah Dahlen. There's not many people who do not know who Hannah is, but let me give you a rundown. Hannah Dahlen, AM. It's so fancy to have letters after your name, I think. Hannah Dahlen is the Professor of Midwifery and Associate Dean in the School of Nursing and Midwifery, Western Sydney University. She's been a midwife for more than 34 years. She is one of the first midwives in Australia to gain eligibility to access to a Medicare provider number and prescribing rights following government reforms in 2010. Hannah worked for nearly 10 years as a privately practicing midwife alongside her role as a Professor of Midwifery. Hannah has published over 300 papers and book chapters and has strong national and international research partnerships. In 2019, Hannah was awarded a member of the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for her significant services to midwifery, nursing and medical education and research. In November 2012, Hannah was named in the Sydney Morning Herald's list of 100 people who change our city for the better and named as one of the leading science and knowledge thinkers for 2012. Hannah, our lovely friend, welcome to Birth Time, the podcast.
Good to see you both.
You know, it's funny, Jerusha and I were just chatting before with Jo. We were remembering when we started filming Birth Time and you were our first interview. And, you know, we had self-taught ourselves quite a lot of the roles. I mean, Rue had experiences in beautiful videography, but kind of we all got together and I taught myself sound and Jo got on. Like, you know, there's a lot of upskilling, wasn't there, Rue? And our first interview with you, the sound didn't work. And so we had this beautiful 2 hours at your home and we felt we were like really great and we're like just starting this huge vision and we get home and there's crickets of the sound. It was so embarrassing and you very, you know, kindly extended the invitation. We went back and did it again. It was hilarious, wasn't it, Rue?
Yes. And I also remember that it was 2016. And I remember having a conversation, did I think it was a good idea? And I was like, I think it's a great idea. And guess what? We had the International Normal Labour and Birth Conference coming up and all the experts will be there. So I'll book out the bridal room and you guys can go use the bridal room and start filming. And so that was the beginning of a big deal.
Let's just put that in context, though. That bridal room was not really a bridal room. Like, it was a tiny room. And we were, like, swapping out cushions. It was, like, the pokiest place you've ever seen. And all these very prestigious, elite international guests would come. And we were trying to fancy it up. There's this little train that could, three of us just going, we can do it with babies in tow on boobs. And I don't even know how we did it. And I think if we were asked to do it again, we would go, no, thank you. But yeah. Anyway.
It was such...
The bridal room was part of the conference venue, just to put it in perspective for everybody.
It was such a turning point for our documentary, though, I think, Hannah, because we interviewed you and that was a pretty big deal. Zoe had 4-month-old Beau. I was 36 weeks pregnant with my first baby. And suddenly we went from having one interview with you to having, I don't know, maybe 10 interviews after that conference. So within the first, few weeks of us starting to think maybe we could do this, suddenly we had this incredible pool of content that it was like, okay, we are away. This train has just left the station and it is going, and we've just got to run and keep up with it. It was, and which is kind of how the project, the making of the film went, wasn't it? So it just charged along and we just raced along behind it, trying to keep up. So that was such a remarkable moment.
Yeah, it's kind of like a full throttle labour where you just... Which we both know, Roo, holding on the back of the freight train going, oh my God,
and just,
I'm not in my body.
It's like all great things in life. If you have, I guess, the courage to take the leap, that's when the greatness happens. It's having the courage to take the leap. And in that courage, there's also needing to have the courage that this could be a big flop. And of course it wasn't.
Yep. Yeah. That is absolutely how it felt at the time. So that was back in 2016, Hannah, and the film was released in 2021. And you've done a lot since then. I mean, one memory that Joe and I were speaking of earlier was in March 2020. We came to a book launch of a book you co-authored called Birthing Outside the System. And it was days before we went into lockdown and the world changed. It was literally the last social engagement I went to before that. That's very clear in my mind. So that's certainly one huge thing that you've done since we released the film. But I don't know, tell us about that and what else has been going on for you?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Birthing Outside the System, the canary in the coal mine, was the last official event at the university before everything just stopped and our world really changed for the next, well, probably has changed forever, but it certainly changed dramatically for the next couple of years. And, that was a culmination of a good 15 years of research looking at why do women choose to avoid our systems, what is driving women away from our systems. And it had 20 chapters and it involved researchers and clinicians from all over the world and consumers. And, the conclusion of all of that is the biggest thing that's driving women to leave our system is the trauma they face in our system, the lack of choice, the dehumanized care, and that we're failing women, and yet we spend so much of our time saying what's wrong with these women. They're somehow irresponsible and they are selfish and they are putting their babies at risk. This is the general discourse. But actually, what's wrong with us? That we are making systems that are so hostile to women that they would rather do it without us completely and take that risk. Because to be in the system with us is so dangerous for them. And so really that lines up beautifully with Birth Time, which is, it's a story of women discovering that birth matters and how we're cared for matters, deeply matters to how we are as women and how we are as mothers and how we are as a society.
Yeah. It feels like it's been a big few years on that front, on raising awareness on that front, and we will come to that on what has been happening, I guess, more recently. And so can you also tell us about what research projects you've been involved in the last few years?
Well, the funny connections between all of these things is that, Joe contacted me, as you would know, which you would have all been a part of, and said to me, I think it was 2021 or the end of 2020.
Yeah.
Because I know I had the birth in the time of COVID study underway, and she said, "Do you think you could whip us up a survey, Hannah? Because we're getting inundated with women contacting us. This film is really generating quite a lot of interest." So it must have been 21 because that's when the film came out. Mm. And she hit me at a time when I was just absolutely flat out. And you don't ask academics to whip anything up. We are we're very laborious, and we're very by the book, and, we take a long time to do things right, which is important. And I almost said no to her. And then I thought, you know what? Hazel Keedle has just finished her PhD. She's full of bubbling energy. She needs an ECR project or an early career research project. Let me get Hazel involved in this. And, the rest is history. There went the birth experience study, the best study. And it's now about to be rolled out in the 14th country around the world. So we have 14 countries that are either in the process of doing or about to do the BEST survey. So a wonderful story that came from the birth of Birth Time was the birth of BEST. And the birth of BEST has rippled around the world. And the birth of BEST was part of why we've ended up with a birth trauma inquiry. So all these things have really rippled as a result of Birth Time, which I think is a lovely story.
And then as a result of, we always say we stand on the shoulders of generations of people who have done this work.
We do.
It has just rolled forward and through us, I think.
Yes, we do. And sometimes you have to say it 1,000 times before people kind of go, oh, I hear you. And then they will act like, well, we always knew this, and, I don't know why you're making such a fuss, because now it's kind of part of contemporary knowledge. But, sometimes you have to go on and on and on about it until people actually run with it.
Has that been exhausting for you, Hannah? Like, you've been relentless and consistent, in the short time I've known you, and I know Rue and Joe have known you longer. But how do you keep showing up for the job and not get worn out or burnt out or despondent?
I keep showing up for the job because I know it matters, and I know it's the right thing, and I know that it's possible, and I know we have the evidence, and I know we have women on our side, and all those things give me great sense of hope. I keep showing up for the job because to not show up is not an option for me. I mean, I'd rather be in it and risk failure than not be in it at all. I keep showing up because of amazing people that I'm surrounded with. It's not ever a one-woman job. All my amazing PhD students, all my wonderful early career researchers, people like Hazel, who I'll be able to hand the baton over to with great joy. She can have the keys to my professor office in time to come. And I keep showing up, number one, because women matter, and we have to get this world right for women. And I also show up because my daughters are now getting to that age when they're going to be birthing and becoming mothers, and I can't be a part of a world that harms them.
Can I ask a question though? Like, since we made the film, the cesarean rates increased, some of the statistics, and you said just now that you're feeling a sense of hope and that it's possible. What are the markers that are making you feel like change is possible and, achievable? And how long before that is implemented?
Absolutely. So the markers for me are the rise in the numbers of midwifery models of care. They're the rise in the numbers of privately practicing midwives. They are the birth trauma inquiry, and the fact that the birth trauma inquiry in New South Wales has now instigated other birth trauma inquiries around the world. They're the fact that the women are rising, and they are loud, and they are having enormous effect, and they are in the halls of Parliament, and they are meeting with parliamentarians. I think that never before in history have we sat at a better moment to stop the juggernaut and to provide answers. I also have a sense of hope, because health cannot continue to do what it's doing. It cannot continue to spend the kind of money it spends on health. It is not sustainable. I also have hope because a sustainable world is now part of the health picture, and midwives and birth are part of that sustainable world picture. So I think that, when you look at all the evidence that's mounted, when you look at all what the World Health Organization and all the major bodies, what the government says, what the general policies and support are around, they're around midwifery-led care, they're around continuity, they're around listening to women, and they're around recognizing we haven't done a good job and we need to do a good job. And so we are situated right where we want to be in history to make fundamental change. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, but we are a long way down to heading in the right direction for this to happen.
And so off the back of the Birth Trauma Inquiry, which you gave evidence at, Hannah, and we have explored that in depth with Fiona Reid in previous episodes, and Sharon and Hazel, we have gone into depth about that. One of the very timely things about us chatting with you today, for those who don't know, the recommendations and findings of the inquiry have been handed down, and government has 3 months to decide what they're going to put into place to make things better, right, for women and babies. And so we are in that 3-month period, and the incredible Emma Hurst, who is an MP, invited us to host a screening of Birth Time at New South Wales Parliament House just this past Wednesday night. And you came along as one of the panel to kick it off. You and Hazel and Joe were on the panel. Sadly, Zoe and I couldn't make it. But quite a remarkable moment. I had a moment in my kitchen when I was, sad at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday night about not being there. And I actually just got goosebumps thinking about the birth scenes that are in Birth Time being shown to politicians in Parliament House. I thought I cannot imagine anything like this has ever been shown before to this level. And so that felt like such a huge shift and such a remarkable moment that we have reached this. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about how that night went, how you think it went?
Yeah, look, I think, walking into the doors of that parliament, walking past a row of photos of white, middle-aged older men that rule our nation was a very kind of profound wake up for me again. I just looked at this row of male faces and I thought, well, no wonder we're in the state we are. But then you see someone like Emma Hurst, a young, gorgeous, modern woman who just has absolutely got this, a feminist to her boots. And of course has not only been the one that's led and chaired the Birth Trauma Inquiry, but also got this film, the showing of the film up in Parliament last week. And so we had a panel and Emma asked us some very good questions. She asked us questions around, well, what do we need to do now? What next? She asked us questions around what do we need to do to support and sustain midwifery workforce, because we have a major shortage and we have midwives burning out. She asked us questions around what do we need to do to get parliamentarians and everyone in the room, what can everyone in the room do now to make this happen? And then we watched, of course, the film. And that film, as someone who does publish a lot and does lots of academic work, that film says more than 1,000 papers that I could ever write. It touches you in a place and it gives you an understanding that our academic work will never do. And it did just that. And you could see the faces of people who were watching that. And you couldn't walk away and not be touched and moved by that film. So it was a good night. I'm sure there'll be conversations and there'll be thoughts and there'll be discussions in those very, prestigious halls, still lined with men, but hopefully men that are going to start to listen.
Well, and Zoe and I can walk away with a claim to fame that our vaginas have been shown in Parliament House, right?
Absolutely. And they look mighty fine.
When Emma asked you, Hannah, you know, I would think for those of you, I was blown away when we made the film meeting midwives who left the vocation to become researchers to get published to change policy. I just blew my mind. And even for you, like when you're up there and in that moment, like you were saying, like finally here is the crystallizing of these eons of time and the people have come before us. Did you feel like when, like, that this change or the suggestions are imminent? Like, do you feel like it's close in terms of like real actionable, okay, like did they ask you about the money? Because bottom line, like saving money and giving continuity of care, do you feel instinctively when you're in the room that, okay, yeah, we're really close to changing the model?
Yeah, Emma asked me a really interesting question, and she said to me, what did you think about the recommendations? And as someone who's been a midwife and working really as an advocate, younger than that, because, you know, I grew up in the Middle East, as you know, and I was a little feminist and caught my first baby by the age of 12. What did I think? I'm always set for disappointment and ready to fight another battle, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was particularly, and I commended her on the night on this, that her dissenting report at the back, I was really impressed with, where she said that obstetric violence should be called gendered violence, and other people who were just a little bit too uncomfortable for that to go in the main report. But I'm just putting together a presentation for a conference that I'm speaking at on Monday, and I'm going through, well, what do we do to prevent and heal birth trauma? And actually, when I look at the recommendations, they now touch on most of those big issues. So primarily, one of the things I said on the panel is we got two responses to something like this as health providers. We can either say, not our problem, be defensive, women should be a bit more realistic, we do a good job, we don't know why everyone's criticizing us. So that can be one response, and I've heard that response. Or we can say, clearly none of us came to this job to do a bad job. Clearly we all came into this job to deliver good care, but women have told us we're not doing that. So our option here really is to say, we're sorry, please help us, guide us, and we will do better, and we must do better. And so when you look at the recommendations, a lot is around the impost on health professionals, as it should be. Birth trauma is not a woman's fault. Birth trauma is often a fault of us and the system. And so, the recommendations around making sure that health providers are trained in trauma-informed care, understand what informed consent is, know how to identify and have conversations with women around birth trauma, know how to give women truly informed consent, know how to acknowledge and understand birth plans and take them seriously rather than with derision. There are so many recommendations in there. And I think most powerful of all is the very strong recommendation that we need more continuity of midwifery care. And yes, maybe that could have been a little bit more forceful, but if there was one thing that you wanted to put into place, if you could only select one thing in order to deal with this issue, if you took continuity of midwifery care and you gave every woman the opportunity to have that, you would halve birth trauma overnight. So I think that's the thing we need to battle for, and that's the thing that women and midwives together need to work together to make sure that we get, because relationship-based care is safe care.
Hey there, Zoe Naylor here from the Birth Time team. Did you know that we have held several live events on popular birthing topics that are available to stream via our website? When you subscribe to the Hub, these are included for free. But alternatively, you can watch now for only $9.99 Australian dollars. Head to birthtime.world to find out more. Now it's back to the podcast. Do we need the federal bodies on board to make that shift as well, or is it at a state level?
We absolutely need the federal bodies on board. And of course, the federal bodies have major sway of funding. They have major sway over things like the Medicare items that are given for different items of care. They have massive sway over what's going on at the moment with the privately practicing midwives insurance issue, which is not a state issue. And then at state level, of course, hospitals have a huge amount of sway over what happens and what models of care get enacted, and also the ability for midwives to walk through those doors and bring their clients. So everyone's got to work together. This isn't just a state or a Commonwealth issue. This is a nation issue that needs to be worked on together.
So, Hannah, with your work in the university with midwifery students, do you feel like the courses need to change? Do you feel like you are on point with how you are educating the midwives coming out into this world? Do you think there is, room for improvement there, or do you feel like they're coming out well set and then it's when they get out in the system that they get let down and get indoctrinated into the ways of the system? Where do you think, what's going on with that?
I think we can always improve, and we must always improve. We must always look at how do we get the messages through, how do we support our students, how do we make sure they access the models of care that can be most ideal for them. So I think that's about a partnership with the local health districts and the hospitals. I would love to see all of our students experience, for example, their whole third year be embedded in a midwifery continuity of care. Research we've just done, one of my PhD students has led the national study on MGP, looking at midwifery group practice and what helps sustain it and what are the management things that are important. And what really struck us, that double the number of BMid students, so there's Bachelor of Midwifery students, than we are producing nationally are in these models. So there's far many more BMid students going into MGP or midwifery group practice than there are those who come through the nursing pathway. And so when I look at as an educator, and I look at states like WA that's got rid of their Bachelor of Midwifery program, Victoria that has hardly any Bachelor of Midwifery, they only have one Bachelor of Midwifery program. And then I look at the proportions in the states of the models of care, and I can see very clearly that the states with high rates of midwifery of Bachelor of Midwifery are producing high rates of midwifery group practice models. So we actually have to see the educational pathways that we deliver as an absolute pathway or a lever to change in the system.
So WA doesn't have any Bachelor of Midwifery courses?
No, they got rid of them all. Now my understanding is they are working to bring back that.
Oof, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, the highest Bachelor of Midwifery graduates are in Queensland, and ironically, they have the highest amount of midwifery models of care.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So if we can move on to something that you just mentioned earlier about the insurance issues that are going on for privately practicing midwives at the moment. Alongside the Birth Trauma Inquiry, there has been there's a big battle going on, I guess, isn't there? This started a little while ago. So for anyone who doesn't know, I guess the background for this is that privately practicing midwives have had an exemption from intrapartum care insurance for the past 15 years. So the birth sex, they got insurance for prenatal and postnatal care, but not for attending births. And that's because there hasn't been an insurance product for those midwives. And so the government is trying to come up with a solution to this. And from what we can gather, it has been alluded to, unconfirmed, that they are proposing an insurance product, which sounds great, but they're looking at putting risk restrictions on this insurance product, limiting midwives to what is known as a Category A risk profile. Would you say that's a correct summation of that, Hannah?
Category A and B is they're really looking at both of those as potentially being in the home birth coverage, yes.
And so there's A, B and C, which is laid out by the College of Midwives. And there's been a big pushback from consumers and from midwives about the restrictions that will potentially be put on how midwives are able to practice Can you give us an insight into that?
Yeah, so there hasn't been an insurance product for home birth now for a very long time, ever since the collapse of HIH. And so as part of that, privately practicing midwives have been able to practice with this exemption, which basically means they're uninsured for the birth, but they're allowed to continue to practice as long as they abide by a series of safety and quality kind of framework requirements. And now, after many years of the exemption, they have decided they have got a product. They could deliver a product. When it comes to an insurance product, you will never get everything insured. That there's no one on earth that's insured for absolutely everything. So you could be, but you'd be paying millions. So you've got this dilemma of trying to have something that's affordable as well as something that's going to support the public needs and the providers. So the insurers have been looking at, well, what can they put into place to guide who is eligible for home birth and who isn't, and of course have come across our ACM National Midwifery Guidelines for Consultation and Referral. I've been involved in them over the past 20 years since we have adopted them. They're now up to their 4th revision, and they're very good guidelines. They're based on New Zealand, the Netherlands, Canada. They're based on extensive consultation and on evidence. The guidelines, however, were never, ever meant to be a triaging tool for home birth. So the government has misused the guidelines and has basically said, well, we'll just take A and B, we'll insure that, and then everybody else is gone. But it's really important for people to understand the guidelines were set up as guidance for midwives to practice in their scope and know when to refer and consult, but not to abandon women and not to coerce women. And so a very fundamental part of the guidelines is you do have category A, which is very low risk, totally within the midwife remit. You have B, which is kind of got a few, tricky things maybe going on in health that you would either consult another midwife with or a doctor. And then you got C, which is really, you should start to think about higher level care, more specialist involvement. But at no point in any of those guidelines were you meant to abandon women, because critical to those guidelines are what we call Appendix A and B, which is if a woman decides to make a decision that may not be the safest based on evidence, or what we would recommend, that she has the right to say, thank you very much, I understand that, but I am accepting the risk and I would like to go ahead with my plan anyway. And so that document then gets signed by the midwife and the woman, the hospital is aware, and then the midwife is protected because she is providing evidence-based, morally and ethically correct care, and the woman is protected from being coerced into a choice she doesn't want to make. So there is fundamental misunderstanding when they say we'll cover A and B and everybody else can't be covered. That's not the intent of the guidelines. So there's nothing wrong with the guidelines, but then take them in their entirety, because you cannot siphon one part of these guidelines off. They were never intended for that. They are a whole. And so that's what many of us have actually argued for. The guidelines are actually good guidelines, but you can't pick and choose and then violate women's rights in the process. And so let's use them to the full extent and not as a punitive measure to screen women in or screen women out. Because if we do that, and, studies we've carried out and then the recent home birth survey will tell us that about 60% of women won't be eligible for homework that currently are having home births, and that will be a stampede into free birth. And I believe the government does not want the deaths of women and babies on its hands. And it may say we don't have a legal responsibility if women don't take our advice, but it has an ethical and a moral responsibility. And we will have to make them see that, because this is too big and important a human rights issue to lose.
Thanks so much, Hannah, for just, bringing us up to speed. I think sometimes I represent the consumer who's the layman. Like, I come not as a birth worker full time. I've worked as a doula, but I just have a few questions that might help listeners kind of bridge some of, if that's okay. And I'm sorry if they seem a bit naive, but I am, around the nuance of this. Can we just talk about the need for insurance? First of all, if there's been an exemption for this long and it's been operating well, why is there a need to change what's doesn't seem to be broken, or is it? Does that need tending to?
So a couple of reasons why it does need to change. As a midwife myself, who did nearly 10 years of privately practicing midwifery myself, I put everything in my husband's name because I knew every day when I went out to care for women, I was risking everything I'd worked for and my family. I was risking the house that we've worked to pay off my children's future. So it is really unfair to put midwives who are professionals and highly trained in a position where they go to a birth and they potentially risk their entire livelihood. And we've seen midwives driven into the ground on this. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if we don't mainstream this and actually fight for the recognition of this as a valid, not only a valid, but an evidence-based option for women, then we're never going to expand this to be available to more and more women. It's always going to be a marginalized minority issue. It's always going to be considered to be out there on the fringe. You're only going to have midwives willing to take the risk to do it. And so if we want to expand home birth, we have to treat the midwives as professionals. We have to validate what the evidence says, and we have to support midwives. And then the third reason is, should there be something that goes wrong, and should the midwife fail in her duty or just life happens, there has to be a recourse for women to be able to support either a profoundly disabled child or a scenario where they feel that they need to have that recourse. So currently we're unfortunately in a system that we don't have in countries like New Zealand, where they have a no-fault compensation, where should something go wrong, that there is an ability to get compensation and the child will be looked after. We would love to see that, because if we had a no-fault kind of compensation system where everybody got insured, basically everybody got covered if something went wrong, we wouldn't have this adversarial system of women having to sue in order to provide care when things do go wrong. So I guess those would be my sort of 3 or 4 reasons as to why we can't continue to drift along in this.
In New Zealand, is that funded by the government?
Yeah, but because they've got their no-fault compensation, yes, that's funded by the government, so which it means their insurance premiums for doctors and midwives are really very affordable.
Mm. And just lastly around this, would a VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, be considered a risk in that? Because so many women reclaim the rite of passage that is birth by having a home birth VBAC. Is that considered one of the high risk scenarios?
No, it shouldn't be, because VBAC is kind of divided between B and C. There's classic cesarean, where you have a cesarean that goes right down the front as opposed to lower segment. There are some really complicated cesareans, and then the majority of cesareans are a reasonably straightforward lower segment cesarean section. So they're in different categories. They've always been treated with different levels of risk. VBAC, I think, when I look at it, I think we have a massive fail on our hands when it comes to VBAC. We have now around 10% of women who have a cesarean will have a VBAC. So doctors, hospitals, health services have failed so badly at VBAC that really I don't think they get to have a say on this. Women are now fleeing to other models where they can actually get that support. If you actually look at the data on VBAC and you say, okay, this thing that's blown up to be so super risky, the perinatal mortality rate, that's the rate of the risk of the baby dying around before, during, or after they're born, is exactly the same having a VBAC as it is having your first baby. But nobody tells you that having your first baby has higher risk than having your second, because there's nothing you can do about it. You've got to have that first baby. So we have blown the risks of VBAC absolutely out of the water. We've also made VBAC so risky in the way we manage it in hospital. So things like, inducing or augmenting or speeding up labour with women with VBAC, worst possible thing that you can do. The best thing with a woman having a VBAC is to give her support, carefully monitor the labour and the baby and, all of those things that midwives are skilled at. And if help is needed, then go and seek that help and transfer. But we have this reverse mentality where we think the safest place to have a VBAC is in hospital because everything's there. But meanwhile, we're making so many things go wrong. We're failing so badly because so few women are having a VBAC. So I've never had an issue with supporting women having VBACs at home. They need an extra level of vigilance. But the drama around VBAC is far overblown for the risk. There are other things that are far more risky than VBAC that people don't seem to be so hysterical about. So I think there's a little bit of power here because the number one reason for a cesarean in this country is a previous cesarean. So giving a woman a cesarean pretty much guarantees your job for the next 2-3 births or however many she has as a surgical option.
Makes me angry. I notice I'm feeling angry in my body. A sense of like, ugh.
There was yet another article this week, I think, that my mum sent through to me about this, Hannah, and I think you were quoted in it, and then there was some doctor in there quoting that it was because of the women being too old and too fat. That's why the cesarean rate is up to 37% where it is, and I just thought it just carries on, doesn't it?
Even worse, the cesarean section rate in New South Wales in private hospitals now is virtually 50%. 50%. It is 49.4% in private hospitals. That is unconscionable. And the irony is, and having just looked at this data, the risk profile as far as age, older women, is the model of care that has the highest number of older women. Do you know which one it is? It's privately practicing midwives that have cesarean section rates under 10%. So this mantra of they're too old, they're too fat, they're too sick, and they're asking for it, it's just got to stop because essentially we are failing so poorly in our job.
It's beyond infuriating, isn't it? It's too much. Oh, well, I would like to just give a little shout out on this issue because there is a core group of consumer representatives that we at Birth Time are working alongside. Those groups being Home Birth Australia, Maternity Choices Australia, Home Birth New South Wales, Home Birth Victoria, Home Birth Queensland, Better Births Illawarra, Hygeia Health, and the Born at Home film. We have all been working in very close contact on this issue, and some of the representatives from that group have just been remarkable. They created a survey that had something like 5,900 responses. These incredible women have left their families and gone to Canberra, to Parliament House this week to hit up politicians, to have the conversations. They are really, really doing the work. So I just wanted to pay credit to those people for fighting the good fight for this, not to fall into evil times, and there's a couple of things they're trying for. One is an extension of the exemption to give us more time to have more appropriate consultation with the valid bodies to be able to make a decision that is relevant and worthy for consumers and midwives. None of that was happening until, these organisations spoke up loud and clear that no one is being consulted here. So I just want to give snaps to those people for working very, very hard. Behind the scenes, a lot of it's all unpaid. It is all, they're doing it when their babies are in bed at night. They're doing this silent work and they might all be done having their babies. They're doing it for the women of the future and for our daughters and for, the people to come. So I just want to pay homage to them and say thank you so much for all you're doing.
They're the suffragettes of the birth movement.
Right? They are.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a big, big time, Hannah.
It's a big time. Home birth has driven on every major reform in maternity care since 300 years ago when we have medicalised birth. The home birth women and their partners and their communities have been the ones that got partners into birth in the 70s. It was them. It was them that asked for it. It was them that pushed for water birth. It was them that pushed for midwives. And so this is the way it has always been, and I admire them immensely, and I know that without them, none of this would change.
So it sounds like we've all got to converge on Parliament House in Canberra now. Hannah, will you be up for a federal screening?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I tell you what, if this PII stuff does not get sorted, I think we might be doing a repeat of the Mother of All Rallies.
And yes, the march.
Yes. That was an amazing event. I will never forget that event. And I'll never forget driving back from Canberra and hearing all the parliamentarians on the listening to it on the ABC, all trying to outdo each other with their stories of how fabulous their midwives were at the birth. So, but we don't want to pull out that sort of thing until there are no other options. It is really important. I've learnt in politics. I've been involved in birth politics for a long time. You do need to be at the table. You do need to be in Parliament. You do need to be strategic. You need to hold your fire. You need to keep your powder dry. And then you need to know how to use it, when to use it, and how hard to use it. And that takes an awful lot of failure. You learn through your failures. We're not there yet, but we may get there if this doesn't get sorted out.
I'm just sitting here going, you need real emotional maturity and like embodied. I don't know if I'd be the best person to represent. I feel myself. I think I'd be a bit too hard on the sleeve. You're perfect, Hannah.
Hard on the sleeve.
A bit too passionate.
The donkey comes out.
Alive. I've not yet reached my political maturity. Let's just say that.
It takes all kinds. It really does.
Well, that's true. That's true. We do need all flavours of ice cream. Hannah, thank you so much. What a treat this has been today.
Hasn't it? Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry Jo couldn't be here, but, you know, she's off doing the work. This is what happens, right?
And some woman's having her life transformed right now, and isn't that great?
Right? Oh, Hannah, thank you so much for all you do, all you are, all you have been. It's huge. It's an enormous legacy that you have and that you continue to create. So from all of us birthing nerds and donkeys out here, we thank you for all of it.
But thank you for joining us today. Your talent and your ability to turn thousands of words that we've written into the most amazing art that's grasped in a second. So, you know, I think together we can't be defeated together.
That means a lot. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. You can check out the show notes to find websites, books, research articles, social media handles, and general information about each of our podcast guests. Thank you to our fabulous birth time sisters, Zoe Naylor and Selena Scoble, for supporting the creation of this podcast behind the scenes. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Birth Time the podcast. Leave us a review and a rating, and please, we'd really love it if you'd share it amongst your friends and networks. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Birthtime World, and our website birthtime.world, where you can also stream and watch our international award-winning film, Birthtime the Documentary. You can find out more about me, Jo Hunter, and my midwifery work at midwifejo.com.au, and more about Jerusha Sutton and her gorgeous photography and doula work at jerusha.com.au. And thank you to you, our beautiful Birthtime family, for tuning in to Birthtime the podcast. We really do appreciate you all so, so much. Until next time.